Now, back to more of Behind the Scenes at the Hanover Theatre. And your host, Lisa Condit.
Welcome back, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here at Behind the Scenes with the Hanover Theatre. This is Lisa Condit, and I'm pleased to be here with Steve Joseph, our chairman of the board, and also Senior Vice President of Individual Disability Insurance Operations over at Unum. Welcome, Steve.
Lisa, it's great to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. So I'd love it if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and really how you became involved with the arts and the Hanover Theatre.
Yeah, it's it's kind of an interesting story. My involvement in the arts. I think some people who know me pretty well, in particular in my younger days, would say, "How did a person like you, who spent most of his life on the football field and athletic arena, ended up so involved at the Hanover Theatre?" And it's really all about my wife Lee and meeting her back in high school.
I love this story. I do. People are going to love it. Keep going.
Go ahead. Yeah. So, we were in high school together, and Lee was a dancer. And I got to admit, back in high school, I didn't have much appreciation or certainly exposure to dance or the arts. But back then, I was smart enough to realize that if I ever had a chance of spending much time with Lee, that I better start learning a little bit more about dance and the arts and musicals and other things. So, going back then, I can remember seeing Lee dance for the first time, and to be quite honest with you, I was so impressed with the athleticism, the grace, and certainly after watching her and the other dancers, you could really appreciate the hard work and dedication that they had devoted to their craft. Similar to myself, who was an athlete. Probably, I think their work and dedication was probably a little bit harder than mine. So that was really my first introduction, was as I began, a lifelong relationship with Lee.
Absolutely. And I know Lee as well, and I love that she was a dancer in the past because I feel like that's something that we share. And as somebody who has really studied dance and also has done sports, it is a very similar work ethic and discipline that you really need to apply to both athletics and to the arts. And arts, some people would say, is really, the workout for the mind and that creativity. So I love the fact that Lee hooked you into this whole thing with performing arts.
Yeah. No, it's great. As a matter of fact, the other short story was, so, after we'd been dating for a while, I think it was their birthday, we were in high school, and the first actually professional show I went to is I scraped up some money and bought a couple tickets to go see Chorus Line in Boston. And, that's obviously an iconic show, Tony Award winner, classic. And this is probably back many years ago. We won't say how far back. So, but, seeing that show there today, at that time, once again, I was so impressed and just entertained with the singing and dancing of that show. It was great.
Oh, absolutely. And another thing that I personally love about the performing arts and arts in general is it really brings issues that people might have a hard time talking about or understanding, and it puts it in a place where we're able to look at something and talk about it and look at other sides of an issue. And especially where we are historically and politically, I think personally the arts has never been more important, and also just that ability to come up with creative solutions and to keep trying different iterations. It's actually very scientific in some ways as well. So that's great. I knew that you had some good personal examples, and I do know that a lot of people in the Worcester area do know you, and they do know your background. And so I'm sure some people are curious, how did the jock get involved with now chairman of the Hanover Theatre and Conservatory for the Performing Arts, which honestly, I don't want to brag or anything, but we are one of the top theaters in the entire world. So congratulations, right?
No, it's a great honor to be able to serve on the board and now to be chair. But, how we got involved with the theater was, kind of another interesting story. Obviously, it was probably, I'm trying to think back now, 12, 14 years ago when the theater was just a vision in the eyes of several people, and it was under construction. And I remember reading about the current construction going on at the theater. And once again, I took the opportunity. I called Lee one day, said, "Hey, let's go for lunch." She probably figured something was up because I never call her to go to lunch with our schedules. And so I met her, and I said, and I took her over to the Hanover Theatre, and we met Nell for the first time, and we walked through the theater, which at the time was under construction. And as we were walking through, I had already kind of decided in my mind we'd like to be founding members. So we walked through the theater, and I said to Lee, let's go pick our seats about, where we're going to be in this theater when it finally opens up. And so that was really our first introduction and Lee's first introduction, to the theater. And since then, we've just continued to be involved and love going all the time and bringing our families and friends. So that's how we kind of get involved.
You've been loyal ever since. And I hope that people who are listening are taking note that this is one of the ways that you stay happily married, everybody.
Yes.
You call your wife and you invite her to lunch, and then you say, "Honey, pick out our seats."
Yeah, right. I got a lot of mileage out of that one, I must admit.
I'm sure. And so, you've seen the organization grow since the very beginning, before we opened the doors, and that was really a thrilling time in our history. And we're at another really crucial time in our history. I like to think about, what's our grand reopening going to look like? Because when we come back from this, that's really what we're thinking about. But talk to us a little bit about, at the board level, what precipitated the board challenge for our resiliency fund?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously as we've been going through this pandemic, and, I think one of the most important things that we've been discussing at the board is, during these challenging times, how do we make sure that the theater survives through this? Because, quite honestly, some businesses, some cultural institutions, whether it's in this city, this state, or across the country, may not survive, unfortunately, through this. So it's really been part of the board's focus, since we realized that, it wasn't just going to be a few shows that got canceled. It was going to be the entire rest of the Broadway series this year and many other shows, through 2020, quickly became, how do we make sure that the organization is stabilized, finances are stabilized? So, one of the things we immediately thought about was, we need to reach out to our patrons, our audience. And, so that's kind of how the Resiliency Fund started. I firmly believe, and our board firmly believes, that if we are going to ask the community to help maintain the theater and to donate their hard-earned dollars to the Hanover when they do have many other choices, we realize that. There are other nonprofits. There are other people who are in need in our community. So it's extremely important that the board steps up and shows their commitment, quite honestly, first. And, I think then if you see how committed our board is, I think it makes it maybe a little bit easier, or people see how committed the board is to the Hanover Theatre, and it's going to help in our fundraising efforts and development efforts over the next several months.
I thank you so much for that. And I know that it always means more to people when they know that the organization supports itself as well, from the board level, the staff level, volunteers, everything. So thank you for taking a leadership role in that as well. So
I think the other thing I'd say, Lisa, just on that piece too, and I think the other thing that's been important over the last several months is, and Troy's done a great job with this, is focusing on the staff too as well. We have a great, outstanding staff at the Hanover Theatre. Many of you have been there for many years, and some from the very beginning. And I also think a lot about our volunteers and all the volunteers we have for our show. So, we can't wait to welcome back people to the theater. We're going to need those volunteers, and certainly, our great staff is important as well.
Yes, we're all looking forward to when everybody feels safe, and I know that we're doing a lot of work to really keep on top of the news, and it changes every day, every week, every month. But the more information we get, the better the plans that we can make so that we can come back really strong. So what's your vision, given all of this, for for the theater and conservatory during your term as board. Has your vision changed given the recent events, or is it the same as it was when you said that you wanted to be chair? I think that.
Yeah, I must admit my vision has changed a bit. Who thought that just 4 or 5 months after taking over, we'd be in the middle of this pandemic and a very challenging situation for the theater. So yeah, my vision has changed. I mean, I think when I first took over as chairman and talking with the executive committee and the rest of the board, my vision and the vision of the board was, first of all, continuing to expand our offerings. Continue to expand. We're always going to have the Broadway series. That's kind of our cornerstone of our year. But what other shows, acts, entertainment, comedy, singing, dancing, educational series? What can we do to continue to expand our offering? Also, I think is very important is how do we increase diversity as well at the theater? And when I talk about diversity, it's in a lot of different ways. It's the diversity of our staff. It's the diversity of our shows. It's the diversity of our audience. Because the more people we get involved in the community, the better the theater is going to be, and the more sustainable we'll be, and they'll be able to grow. And I think the other piece that's been greatly successful, and it's been our conservatory. We started small with that, and I think as our listeners have probably heard, we've expanded the conservatory space over the last several months. And even during this time, which I want to thank all the students at the conservatory, we're still holding online classes now. So the conservatory is definitely an area that we continue to see expansion. So, hope to see expansion.
Absolutely.
But I would just think, the way maybe things have adjusted a little bit since the pandemic happened is, like I said earlier, is, how do we make sure that we stabilize the finances of the theater to make sure that we are ready to reopen? And so we've been spending a lot of time there over the last several weeks.
Absolutely. So maybe you've already answered this, but if you had to roll all of this into one bow, how would you describe what you would like your legacy to look like as chairman of the board?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm hoping my legacy isn't that I have the least amount of shows during my 2-year term as board chair. So I'm hoping that is not my legacy, Lisa. So
you know what? I don't think you have to worry about that because, Steve, our very first season, we had fewer shows than we did so far. So I think you're going to be safe.
Okay. That's good. That is really good. I think my legacy, like with anything else, there's this saying, a quote that talks about honoring those who came before you, and it talks about leaving a legacy. So, from my perspective, the board chairs, all the members of the board that have served at the Hanover did a tremendous job of building the theater, opening the theater, building it to, as you said, one of the premier theaters in the country, if not the world, for its size. So to me, it's, how do I maintain that? And my legacy, I hope, and that of the current board is, how do we expand on that? How do we make it stronger? Like I said, how do we have more offerings, different shows? How do we expand the diversity of our audience, of our staff? And I think the other piece, too, is important for us is, whether it's an endowment or expanding the support and development of the theater. We've done a great job over the last 10 years, but I think what we need to do now is, because unfortunately when you have something like a pandemic, it's important that you have an endowment and that you have a good development strategy so you maintain the long-term viability of the theater. So, I'm hoping through my term there that we can expand in those areas.
Well, I cannot wait to see how this all continues to develop. I am so proud that I was part of the opening team, and I look forward to what I know is going to be a bright future once we really do get past this. So Thank you so much for the work that you do, Steve. I really appreciate it. To everybody who's listening, if you'd like more information about our Resiliency Fund or anything that the Hanover Theatre and Conservatory is doing, please visit our website. It's the Hanover Theatre, spelled with an RE.org. And that wraps it up for Behind the Scenes with the Hanover Theatre this week. Steve, again, thank you so much for your time. Everybody else, we'll tune in again next week. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing you once again at the theater.